my God, you know what gets me? You know what gets me excited? You know what gets me all tingly inside? The thought of millionaires paying taxes. Oh, God. Oh, man. Someone's gonna have to clean this room up after because I'm getting all steamy. Okay, the IRS. This is so awesome. The IRS is cracking down on 1,600 millionaires to collect millions of dollars in back taxes. This money that the IRS is only able to do this because of the Biden administration's decision to include more IRS funding in the Inflation Reduction Act passed a year or so ago. Because of this, the IRS now has the tools, the means, and the people to go after the tax cheats who have been ripping you and me off for years. Now let's go into this, okay? So the IRS on Friday announced that it is launching an effort to aggressively pursue 1,600 millionaires and 75 large businesses that owe hundreds of millions of dollars in past due taxes. You pay your taxes every time you get a paycheck. If you don't pay your taxes, the IRS will come down on you hard. If you don't pay your taxes, the IRS will garnish your wages. If one of these 75 massive companies doesn't pay their taxes, they get defended by some legislators in the country and no one bats an eye. Mm-hmm. That is starting to change. Okay. So Daniel Werfel, he is one of the leaders of the IRS enforcement mechanisms. He's one of the leaders in that department. He said that the federal funding has helped them develop artificial intelligence tools, and they can now more impactfully and specifically target wealthy people who have been able to cut corners. That, when you're able to have that much money, you're able to pay people to make your taxes lower because you're able to find all the loopholes and cut the corners that the IRS, it takes too long for the IRS to figure out you got away with theft. Mm-hmm. But now, with this artificial intelligence, they're able to stop that. Werfel says this in the interview, if you pay your taxes on time, it should be particularly frustrating when you see that wealthy filers are not. He said that 1,600 millionaires who owe at least $250,000 each in back taxes and 75 business partnerships that have assets of roughly $10 billion on average are targeted with these new compliance efforts. I think it's so cool that they're using AI to detect the cut corners. Yes. Right? That's already such an awesome application of the technology.
Yes. And I'm glad that the government is doing that. What I expect to be a cost-cutting mechanism, mm-hmm. right? When budgets are already tight, when we're already borrowing so much to fund the government as is, that they're doing something that's going to lower the cost of their operations.
Absolutely. And now, what is the impact of this? How much money is actually being kept away from the government through this? Well, a team of academic economists and the IRS researchers in 2021 found that the top 1% of U.S. income earners fail to report more than 20% of their earnings to the IRS. You are taxed on 100% of everything you earn. These guys are only taxed on 80% of what they earn. Why? Because they have more money than you. That's the only reason.
I'll also say in that same study, they found that is compared to 7% of true income not being reported in the bottom 50%. Nice. So it's almost triple the percentage of income in the top 1% that goes unreported.
Unfathomable. Absolutely unfathomable. Now, who would be against this? Who would be against paying your taxes that you're supposed to be paying? Mm-hmm. Well, Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist leads the Conservative Americans for Tax Reform group, and he says that the IRS plan to pursue wealthy individuals does not preclude the IRS from eventually pursuing middle-income Americans.
Okay, to me, this is like a different type of dog whistle that has become... And dog whistle is almost like a wrongly charged word for me to use there.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a racially charged dog whistle. No, what do you mean by dog whistle?
It's a dog whistle in that they're not okay with applying a certain policy to one group or one type of behavior. And they say, oh, well, if they start here, then they can keep doing it with everyone else. Well, that's not a good enough reason to not use a policy to fix the problem that is happening with one specific group of people.
Let's get to that problem when it comes. Yes. Right? Let's deal with that if that happens. Because I agree with you. If the IRS uses this money to go harder against lower income people, then I'm with you. Mm-hmm. But The IRS already has a history of going against people with low income. Why? Because it's easier. Because you don't have the lawyers. Because they didn't cut corners. They just accidentally filed their tax return wrong, and now they're getting hounded by the IRS because they don't know how to file their taxes, and there isn't a built-in e-file system in the IRS. They have to pay somebody else to do their taxes for them. They don't have the money to do it, so they try to do it themselves. Then they get called for tax fraud.
Yeah.
That's why lower income people get audited more.
Exactly.
And it's ridiculous. So Republicans are also against this. Republicans, during the debt ceiling negotiations, built in a $1.4 billion reduction to the IRS, and also tried to rescind $20 billion from the Infrastructure Reduction Act additional funding that's going over the next 2 years. What I've heard from the IRS is that this $20 billion wasn't really needed anyway. And it's not going to make that big of a difference because what they had planned to do is going to get done no matter what now.
Yeah. Well, I think $60 billion for the IRS is already just so enormous.
Exactly.
Right? Compared to their funding, which has been systematically decreased for multiple decades now. That's all I had to say.
Okay. You sounded like you were going to keep going there.
I felt like I did for a second.
Fuck. Okay. So now I want to go into a little bit of a history of why the IRS was underfunded for so long.
Yeah.
And just kind of what's been happening here. So in 2012, the number of audits for people with over $1 million in income was 41,000. Okay. 41,000 people were audited who made over $1 million in 2012. In 2017, the first year of the Trump administration, it went down to 22,000. A 50% reduction in the number of millionaires getting audited in Trump's first year. Then 2018, his second year, drops down to 16. 2019 drops down to 14,000. 2020 drops down to 11,000. 2020 makes sense because of COVID and everything. 2021 starts bumping back up, but this is still pre any more funding.
Yeah.
We're about to see an explosion in this number.
Yeah. And so the reason this was happening specifically is the IRS has changed the type of people that they hire.
Because of budget constraints.
Yes, exactly. They're hiring more, quote, tax examiners rather than revenue agents. So tax examiners are paid less, but they're also less knowledgeable. So they're much less equipped to audit millionaires who probably have multiple sources of income, who might be sheltering money in a bunch of different accounts, who have a team of lawyers and accountants that work for them. So these tax examiners, instead, the only way they can spend their time really is to audit poorer people.
Yeah. I mean, and so in 2010, we had over 14,000 revenue agents. And let's say this. In 2010, we had 15,000 revenue agents and 12,000 tax examiners. So it's like a, what is that? 55-45 split, 45% revenue agents. 55% revenue agents, 45% tax examiners. Well, when you go to 2021, we only have 8,000 revenue agents and 12,000 tax examiners.
Yeah.
That number has gone 60-40 tax examiners. These people don't have the knowledge or the education or the wherewithal to go after the millionaires.
No.
And it's because that the IRS just didn't have the money. They had empty seats that they needed to fill, but instead of paying the people $90,000 for educated people, they were paying $60,000 to undereducated people who didn't have the skills they needed to go after the millionaire tax cheats that makes your taxes higher at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's only to speak of the composition of who's been hired. What's also buried in the numbers there is that the total there was 27,000 workers in 2010 versus 20,000 workers in 2021.
Do you think there's less taxes being filed in 2010 than now?
Yeah, no, our population has been growing since then. It hasn't been shrinking.
Why would we be shrinking the size of our IRS when our population is growing? It makes no sense. It's a desired goal to not be able to capture the income of the upper percent of people. It's the desired goal. At a certain point, it became easier for them to be like, oh, wait, we don't even have to cut our taxes. We could just make it harder for the government to enforce the current tax law.
Exactly. It feels like neoliberalism through and through.
Oh,
it's
God.
Like we don't have to fight the Democrats in Congress to to change what tax law is. We can do this all just in the implementation.
Right. We can just totally do it in the implementation.
Yeah.
One of the good things that have come out of this additional IRS funding is during this tax season, if you called the IRS office, you had a 92% chance of somebody actually picking up the phone.
That's awesome.
Last year, it was 30%. A 60% increase in people picking up the phone for a necessary government service.
Yeah.
All because Republicans didn't want millionaires to pay their fair share. It's making it impossible for you to get help filing your taxes. So we try to be, we've already talked about some bipartisan things that we want on the show.
Yeah.
We want Democrats and Republicans to work together to figure out how to keep the government funding. But Republicans need to get off of their defense of millionaires to such this disgusting extent. Okay, you can be for lower taxes. I understand that. But you need to be able to be ready to apply the same tax code you apply to me and to a single mom that you're going to apply to a millionaire.
Yeah, I think the problem is they just don't want, like their perspective is, we don't want taxes anyways. Right. So why would we give money to the IRS? Like, we're fine with people evading or avoiding their taxes.
Yeah, we encourage it.
Yeah.